Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Silvates podcast. So, today on the podcast, I have Andrew Scott, who is a teacher in the UK and also an author. Now, Andrew's just published his first book. It's a children's book called Billy the Brave, the world's first superhero. So, I'm really lucky to be able to get Andrew on the podcast today. Thanks so much, Andrew, for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me so far.
Now, I'm so excited, and I've seen the book, I've held it in my hands. I'm really excited for other people to get a hold of it. I think it's just such a beautifully written, but also illustrated book. And I'm going to let you talk about it first because I can gush all day about it. But I wondered if you could maybe tell us, for people who don't know you, what your background is and what inspired the book.
So I've been teaching for 15 years now, and one of my favorite things to do is to read to the children. They love seeing me read to them, putting on silly voices, and I really love having the children in the palm of my hands, especially if the book that I'm reading ends on a cliffhanger. It's a really good and very satisfying part of my job, sort of reading to the children, whether it be at the end of the day or in the lesson. So I've always dreamt that I would love to write a children's book. And then whenever it came to 2013, the government introduced the new grammar scheme of work in the national curriculum, and it outlines so much more grammar for the children to learn. And myself and the parents of my students were never taught any of this before, like subjunctive form or parenthesis. It was a lot more detailed. And then I found myself as a teacher having to teach lessons that incorporated this grammar, but I would have to search the internet for examples of it, or if I was reading a book to them at the time to make it relevant for them, I'd be reading through the book trying to find examples. And then I sort of thought to myself, well, if I wrote a really exciting children's book that I know what children like, because obviously I teach the children in my class. I've taught every year group from reception to year 6. And I thought, well, if I included all the grammar in the story, then it would help teachers because it would all be there for them, but also help the students because they could use it at home, and also support the parents in that they can also learn what they didn't learn at school.
That's amazing. And for anyone listening, can you give us just a brief synopsis of what the story is like? Like, where do we find Billy? What happens?
So at the start of the book, Billy is a very anxious lemur. He doesn't like to leave his family tree, the Gondwana tree, very often. Unfortunately for Billy, his brother is lost to the jungle of no return and presumed dead. No spoilers there. Presumed dead. And I don't want to give too much away, but he ends up within the jungle on a quest for his brother. And on his way, he meets friends and foes, and obviously dinosaurs. And there are lots of sticky situations he finds himself in that he has to escape. Yeah, I don't really want to give too much else away, but yeah, it's definitely an adventure within the jungle, fighting against some of the most deadly beasts on the planet.
I think that's a brilliant synopsis of the book. And I think you really hit the nail on the head there, because I don't remember growing up necessarily learning explicitly about grammar in the way. I mean, you used words that I've never even used before. So that's how good a teacher you are, Andrew. I wonder then, who's the book for? What kind of age ranges is it written for?
Okay, so I would say it's an upper key stage 2 book. So I would say 8 plus. It can be, the glossary at the end covers from year 1 to year 6. So it covers all abilities in terms of, so if you've struggled with grammar in the past and you're in year 4, or if you're in year 5, you can still learn those things that you might have missed. It could be read, it's obviously down to the parents' discretion. But it does it's quite an exciting book. It has dinosaurs in it, and the illustrations, like I mentioned before, are quite dark. So the parents can choose, obviously, depending on their children, but I would recommend that it's more of a more older primary school aged book, probably 7 or 8 plus.
So Andrew, tell me, what's the process like writing your first book? Where do you start? Where do you get the ideas from? Help me out, because I'm thinking of writing a book.
Well, I actually wrote the book in 2016, I think it was, in the summer. So in true teacher fashion, I had 6 weeks off, and I'd already been experimenting that year with the characters and sort of come up with the ideas of what was going to happen. But I always found I just don't have enough time. I really need to sit down and sort of dedicate myself to this story. And I thought the summer is the perfect time. I have a long time to use. And basically, I would sit out in the garden, and I hand wrote it when I first wrote it, actually. I sat out in the garden and I would write a couple of chapters a day, or I would go into London and sit in a coffee shop and sort of write there. And I literally can't really explain it. It just, the whole story just, came out of me. And sort of, I think all of the planning that I'd done months before, like with characters and which dinosaurs that I wanted to include and things like that, it all just sort of came together in that one sort of, that 6-week break. And I just wrote it. But obviously 2016 was a long time ago. And I then obviously had to type the story up. And then the tricky part was then going back to the story and editing it so that it had all of the grammar within it. The glossary itself took a very long time as well, because it all had to be color coded and referenced. And if you change one thing in the book, you have to change the glossary. So that took a long time. And after I wrote it for the 6 weeks, it wasn't like I then carried on. Obviously, you go on holiday, or you're back at work, and lots of things in life get in the way. So I was always doing it in bits and bobs. And I'd be meeting Kieran as well. She obviously has her own life as well. And she had her studies and doing a master's, and we would be able to meet up and say, okay, I would like this picture. What do you think of this? So it took a long time for that reason, really. And it wasn't really until lockdown when, again, I had a long period of time and I thought, this book has been on and off for so long, I really need to finish it. And it wasn't really until lockdown then that I was given the time and opportunity, really, to dedicate myself to the book again. So it took a long time. So I would say you need to have sort of planned out where you want to go, and then get to dedicate yourself a long time to sort of just let it happen naturally, and get into the writing process.
I love that it took its time. You didn't rush it, and I love that. It sounds like for a lot of people during lockdown, this sort of creativeness, this creative burst sort of resurged for a lot of people. And I'm finding, this podcast came about in lockdown. I'm wondering, have you always been creative like that, with storytelling, with language?
It's definitely something that I've always loved. That I did English literature at A level, but I remember my home economics teacher at A level. She would always comment on how she loved like my writing style, and I wasn't writing for an English purpose. I was just writing, about the assignment that was in home economics, and she would always compliment me on my writing style. But I must say, to be honest, just thinking about school, I actually remember in my first year of secondary school, and the teacher told my mum at parents' evening that I needed to have like remedial English lessons. My writing wasn't strong enough. And then in my second year of secondary school, I got a different teacher, and her name is Miss Pollock. And I had her for 2 years. And that just shows you the difference a teacher can make. She really believed in me, and she really brought out the best of my writing skills. So then when I went into my 4th year at secondary school, I got back my original teacher, who then couldn't believe. And he said to me, like, what's happened to you? And I thought, it is really down to Miss Pollock and her teaching, really, that really brought out sort of the writer within me. But in terms of creativity, I've always been like I'm hand make my birthday cards for my friends, and I like planning events and holidays and stuff. I like being creative.
Well, I hope somewhere Miss Pollock is listening to this, because
I hope so too.
it's such a testament to how influential a teacher is to not just the academic standing of a child, but their growth, their personality, their self-esteem, their confidence. And it sounds like, you really had a good one there.
No, she was an amazing teacher. Thank you very much, Miss Pollock, if you're listening.
Go buy the book, Miss Pollock. You talked about parents reading with children. I wonder, in your experience as a teacher, do parents necessarily still read with their children? Are they expected to read independently? What do you find happens with the kids that you teach?
Well, currently, I'm in year 1 this year, um, and it is expected, obviously, that the children read with their parents. It is expected as well that they do read independently as well. As the children sort of get older through the school, the focus is more that the children should read themselves. But when I was in year 5, I would still encourage the parents to sit down and read just a couple of pages with them, and sort of ask them sort of more sort of retrieval and vocabulary questions, or inference, like, why do you think that character did this, or what was the second item in that list, just to make sure that they're actually paying attention to what they're reading.
Mm. And so, did you grow up reading as a child? Were you sort of encouraged to do that by your parents?
Yeah, I would always read before bed with my mom and dad. I always loved to read, and which is why, now I to see my book in front of me is such an amazing feeling, because I just sort of think back to when I was a child and my mom and dad reading stories to me, and thinking now that I've actually written a book myself is amazing. But also, obviously, as I got older, I would be reading a lot more independently. But we would still be, I studied English literature at A level, and we were able to choose a book that we wanted to write about for our coursework. And my mom and dad were avid readers as well. And I remember my mom was reading a book called Pompeii by Robert Harris, and we would sort of recommend books for each other. And she said, "Oh, why, this is a really good book, Andrew. I think you'd really like it. You could always base your A-level coursework on that." And I read it and absolutely fell in love with it. And that I based my piece of work on that. And yeah, so even as I got older, we were still recommending books, talking about books. It's always been something within our household, really.
That's amazing. I think there's something quite special about, your relationship with your parents, especially with your mum, because equally my mum was such an avid reader. Like, she would breeze through books like nothing. And it would take me like 3 times as long to read the same book as her. And I remember just being able to have those conversations with her about the books that we both had read, and how that facilitated sort of that it reinforced parts of that literature, that love of literature, that love of language, and that love of reading. So I think that's really special. What are your favorite books as a child growing up?
Oh. Well, I must say, Skellig by David Almond was definitely one of my favorites. Um, as I got sort of more into year 6 and sort of a bit older, I loved a series of unfortunate events. There's 13 books in that series, and I really loved that as well. But I would read anything really. I always love being in the book corner at school, which is one thing that I always make sure I have in my classroom, is a really sort of well stocked, very attractive, very comfortable. Like, I've got, like, it's all themed around the beach, and it has like a scene setter with like the most comfy rug there for them to sit on, with like pillows, and Johnny the monkey, our class guided reading mascot, which the children love to lie on and they can read. And there's like book reviews where they can go and write a book review and sort of stick it up, so they can read what their friends are reading, and then maybe make maybe make a choice based on what their friend is reading. So yeah, definitely, I've definitely put that into my own practice now, seeing as the book corner was something that I loved as a child, just to make sure that sort of it really develops in my classroom, sort of like the love of reading, and sort of how powerful it can be for children as well.
Absolutely. I mean, are kids still reading things like Enid Blyton and I don't know, I read the Point horror series, which doesn't sound very highbrow, but it was thoroughly entertaining when I was a child.
Yes, I in my previous school when I was in year 4 and 5, some children were reading Enid Blyton. Goosebumps is still, that was a popular series when I was a child. That's still quite popular. Um, and yeah, like the usual classics like the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and yeah, Alex Rider is quite he's quite popular as well. Um, but yeah, the children, they definitely still love to read. And I think in class, by promoting and reading good quality text at the end of the day, really inspires them then at home to want to read more. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering what you would tell parents who have children who aren't interested in reading or get very bored maybe with reading and have a very maybe a short attention span, or they'd rather be going out and playing and things like that. Because I've certainly encountered sort of my friends' kids who, they'll start reading and get very distracted, for example. What would you tell parents if they're coming across that type of situation?
I actually have that question quite a lot. And well, with the older children, when I was teaching the older children, but I would say to take them into a bookshop, not have a time limit, just to take them in and just explore and sort of browse the books that are in there, and let them look at the front covers and the blurbs, and just find a book that really interests them. Not sort of forcing them, oh, everyone's reading Diary of a Wimpy Kid, so it must be really good, and buy them lots of copies of that, because every child is different. And I do know that with my book, I remember when I was in year 5 or year 4, I think it was, there was a book called The Wolves and the Walls. And I had some quite reluctant readers in that class, and they did not like reading, but they loved that book because the illustrations were so striking and so dark. And they absolutely loved that book. And I remember an important thing that I really wanted with my book is that I wanted to have really good, powerful illustrations in my book to attract sort of all types of reader. And as you've seen, like the illustrations in my book are quite dark, they're very powerful. And I would hope that anyone that is a reluctant reader that would see the illustrations it would really make them want to pick up the book and find out what it's about.
Hmm. And I find, especially with children's books, the content is important, but I feel like the illustrations are just as important. Who did the illustrations for your book?
Yeah, I definitely agree. The illustrations are just as important. And I think it's a real shame that a lot with the older books now, there are no illustrations. It's just the front cover, which is why I really wanted to have some really good illustrations in the book. But actually, my illustrations are done by a friend of mine called Kieran Chana. I met her, actually, she was the daughter of my teaching assistant whenever I taught in year 2. And she'd helped out in school, and she'd done some volunteering, coming on trips, doing reading one-to-one with children that needed more help with their reading. And I realized what a phenomenal artist she was from working with the children and talking to her. And it was at this point that I started thinking about, I'm going to write a book. I've got a really good idea. And we just got into talking, and she said, oh, I would love, I told her my idea, and she said it sounded phenomenal. And at that time, and still to this time, there was no books that did what my book does, in terms of the teaching element at the end of it. And she said, I would love to illustrate your book. And then we just met very regularly. We used to sit down at a big long table, and she would have practice drawings. And I said, oh, I like that. I'd like to introduce that. And yeah, and we were both definitely singing from the same hymn sheet, though. She really sort of understood what type of images I wanted, and she actually went beyond what I could ever have imagined, because the illustrations are just absolutely beautiful.
And I can attest to that. I've seen the book, and
Thank
the
you.
illustrations are really amazing and so intricate and detailed as well. And not what you're expecting from a children's book. It's not a very cartoonish type of illustration. It's quite real, it's quite tangible. It feels like it jumps out at you a little.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, I'm not, my colleagues will tell you when I'm in year one at the moment and I have to draw a picture to match what I'm writing, but I am not a talented artist at all. But so I don't know much about art, but I do know that she uses very, very specific techniques of like watercolors and layering pictures upon pictures upon pictures, sort of to, and it's just a very, very unique style of art, and it really stands out.
Yeah, and it shows. I wonder, Andrew, how long, or is there a recommended time that parents should be sitting with their children and reading with them?
Again, it depends on the age of the child. So, like I said, if it was for the older children, I only ever recommended just, a couple of pages and then let the children read themselves, as well, because they kind of want to be more independent. They don't want to be reading out loud. They want to be reading, by themselves. But I would say, a good 15, 20 minutes a day for the younger children. Um, yeah, I would say that would be a really good way just to, and it's not just reading like I don't mean for 1 minute that they should be reading nonstop for 20 minutes. I mean, they should be talking about the characters with them, asking them, oh, what do you think is going to happen next, or what did you think of that? So it's more like a dialogue. So the children, will read some of it, but to get into a good conversation about it and really develop like a really good oracy and sort of love of reading in a way, like I kind of did with my parents in the end. Just talking about books and sort of recommending books, and you sort of get to that stage by starting in the very early years, talking about books, and sort of finding out what you like and recommending books.
Yeah. I always feel like there's this pressure for kids to read more or for parents to be more involved with their reading because they're not doing it enough, or there's this pressure for them to do more of it. How much does that translate when they get older and they start learning independently? Are there any sort of connections between how much or how involved kids are with reading at a younger age to sort of their academic sort of attainment, or what they end up doing afterwards as older children or even teenagers?
I would say obviously every child is unique. So you might have a child that doesn't read much at home, that ends up, really flying high in the future. But sort of more generically, I would say that the children that read the most at home, obviously gives them a lot more confidence with their literacy, expands their vocabulary, and as they get older in school, it's their writing that you really see the difference in their repertoire of vocabulary, and their writing style sort of is because they've been exposed to so many different types of text and so many different authors, sorry, that and each author has their own writing style. So I would say you can definitely see in their writing which children read at home, because they've sort of been influenced by an author or have the vocabulary, a much sort of wider range of vocabulary that they use.
Yeah, and that's not to say that adults who don't read as regularly sort of are going to pass that on. It just means you just need to encourage them. And I really like what you said earlier. You talked about retrieval cues and asked them about questions about the story. And I love being able to open up almost like a story within the story,
Mm,
with the parent or the guardian and then the child. It's almost like you're exploring it together.
yeah, definitely. And those conversations are brilliant, and the children really enjoy having them as well.
You mentioned aspects of the grammar and things like that from your book. I wonder what makes your book stand out especially given, there are a plethora of books out there that parents might choose, like, the best-selling types like Diary of a Wimpy Kid kind of thing, or Chronicles of Narnia. I wonder what they're going to get from your book that they might not get from others.
Well, like I said previously, the grammar element really makes my book one of a kind. There is not another book out there that does what my book does. Um, and I really hope that teachers, parents, and children can all use it sort of as a teaching tool. But also the story itself, I would say that it's definitely got that unputdownable factor. I've read it to the children that I've taught over the years, and the feedback that I've got is that they loved it, well, because of the illustrations. A lot of the illustrations have been sort of ongoing, so the children over the years have seen the illustrations, they've loved them. But also how it's been written, that at the end of each chapter, you want to read on and find out what happens. So it's definitely, every time I finish a chapter, it would always be, oh, Mr. Scott, can we please read the next part? But obviously we wouldn't have time, it's the end of the day, which is what you really want to get from children. They just don't want to just listen. They really are sort of like really fully immersed in the story and really passionate and wanting to know what happens next. So I would definitely say that was a really a big thing for the children in my class, and the feedback that I got was that they really loved reading it and just couldn't put it down. And the illustrations as well, they absolutely loved. I think the subject as well, like the lemurs being set in the dinosaur era, is a very exciting and a very exciting time. I led an assembly in my current school reading some of my book last week, and they just loved it. And the illustrations really match the content. The dinosaurs look incredible, and the children just love hearing about it.
So, Andrew, tell us where the book is released and when it's released as well.
Okay, so the book is, the official release date is the 29th of June. You'll be able to buy it in all major bookstores. So W.H. Smith, Waterstones, Foyles, Amazon UK, Amazon Australia, and soon to be, it's just gone on for pre-order on Amazon Australia, but also soon to be Amazon India as well.
My people will be very happy about that.
Yeah, it's, I must say, I'm still in a bit of shock about the whole thing, to see it even on Amazon for the first time, if I type my name in, and to hear that it's going to be sold, across 3 continents now is just, yeah, it really is a dream come true. And I really haven't until I think I see it in the shop, then yeah, I don't think it will hit home until then.
I only imagine amazing things coming from this. Have you thought about another book yet, or is it too soon?
No, I've got 2 sequels in the pipeline. I can't tell you where I'm going with them, but yes, I have 2 sequels planned at the moment, and probably will be start writing them in September, probably. Yeah, and that's all I can say really about that.
So if people want the sequel, they've got to buy the first book.
Exactly.
Where can people find more information on your socials, for example?
So there is a Billy the Brave, the world's first superhero Facebook page, and also there is the world's first superhero Instagram page, where it'll obviously be updated whenever the book is out, and when at the moment I'm currently in the process of organizing like my book launch, and yeah, some more information you can find there.
Amazing. And we'll link all the details down in the show description below so people can find links to the book and to your social media. Thank you so much for joining me and telling me about your amazing book. I'm so honored to be able to have you on.
No, thank you, Sylvan. I feel honored to be here. I was listening to a couple of your podcasts actually last week. And yeah, I can't believe that I'm now here. So thank you very much for having me.
You're one of the few on the podcast. Amazing. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.